Action. Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's hours. My name is Oscar Gutierrez. I'm a senior consultant with RPI, and today we're going to be talking about the Total Agility Designer. We're going to take a deep dive into the workflow designer for the new KTA 7.8. If you haven't upgraded already, we do have a webinar with what's new in 7.8 and why you should be considering an up. You can find that on our website if you want to take a look at it at a later date. I'm a senior consultant with RPI, specializing in Kofax TotalAgility, RPA, amongst other softwares. So let's get started. So within 7.8, we do have a new menu on the left side as opposed to the icons that we had before. So today we're going to be selecting workflow and business processes. I've gone ahead and taken the liberty of creating a new category for this demo so we can start fresh and we can keep track of easily of the processes that we're creating today. So without further ado, we're going to go ahead and create a new process designer, which will give us a blank slate within Total Agility. One of the first things that I like in my processes is actually starting the process with a decision node. So today, the process that we're going to be working with is going to be a process that will be started from the scanner. So we're not have any initialization taken manually, so everything is going to be done in the scanner. We will create a document and a folder for that, and we'll get into that shortly. One of the things that I like to do is having a decision node initially to kick off your workflow, and this will make sure that we don't have any blank pages or any process automatic got created without actually having any pages. Before, a scan user can click several times the scan button because the page was not loading, and they created a couple of jobs that had no documents and ended up in the suspended mode. Then they worried that those jobs, they didn't know why they would be suspended. So one of the things is I'm going to go ahead and call this folder empty, just because we are going scanning into a folder, and we want to make sure that there's actually any type of documents for that. Before we actually get into that, we're going to go ahead and create an extraction group with just a couple of fields so that we can mimic the document creation, the folders for our process. So again, I'm going to go ahead and select a new one, and I'm going to be putting all of these within my office hours category. I'm going to go ahead, before I forget, I'm going to take my category and I'm going to select my office hours category. Now, just to be a little bit self-explanatory, further down the line, I'm just going to call my folder. So I'm going to go ahead and take this one and release as well. Make sure that that will be available to our process. Then we're going to be creating a new extraction group as well. Again, I'm not going to touch up too much on the fields that we're going to be utilizing for this extraction group, because we do have another office hours scheduled for next month that you'll be able to sign up, and we can actually go in and setting up the fields and working with Transformation Designer. So today I'm only going to take a few fields just so we can get an idea of what it would be creating an extraction group. Again, one of the first things that I do, because this is something that I tend to forget at times, is changing the category. So we have the root document type. I'm going to create my document type 1. Today, the initial demo is going to be an invoice processing solution. So I'm just going to go ahead and call this my invoice document. We go ahead and create a field group. I'll leave the name default for this one. And one of my first fields that I'm going to be creating, again, it's invoice number. Then I'm going to create invoice date. I'm going to go ahead and delete this field group. Customer name. Invoice amount. I'm going to make this a number. And I think for now, that will be okay. Invoice number, we're going to leave it as text just because in some instances, some of the invoice numbers do have alphanumeric characters. Invoice date, I'm going to go ahead and change it into a date type. Customer name, again, that's going to be text just because of the type of fields that we're going to need. Then we're going to have our invoice amount and the number type. So again, I'm going to go ahead and release this extraction group, close and unlock, and now I'm going to create the classification group for it. Again, I take off the default category and I do my office hours category. Classification group. This is going to be my invoice classification group, and I'm going to go ahead and add the extraction group that we just recently created. I'm going to go ahead and select OK, and release. This should now be available to our project. We can see the invoice, the classification group, and we should see the group 1. I'm actually going to go ahead and rename this just because group 1 is not very descriptive. So I'm just going to call it my invoice extraction group. I'm going to go ahead and save it and release. One of the nice features about 7.8 is if you want to re-release any associated classification groups. So we are going to hit yes. Now we don't have to manually go in and release the classification groups again. That's one of the newer features that has been attached to later versions of Kofax. Now we see our invoice extraction group. So we can definitely go back over to our new process. We're going to go ahead and start creating some variables. So one of the first variables that I'm going to go ahead and create is going to be my folder variable. Again, I'm just going to call it folder because I want it to be descriptive of what it is, at least for this purpose. It's going to be my initialization variable because that's what we're going to be utilizing in scan. And we're going to go ahead and change the type into a folder. We're going to go ahead and select default, the one that we just created a couple of minutes ago. And we're going to go ahead and now we have a folder. For this purpose, I'm also going to create a document variable. That's not going to be initialized because we're going to be utilizing that throughout the process, but definitely that's something that we can touch up on a little bit later. So again, I'm just going to call this document, and we're going to be calling it's a document type variable. We go over to our office hours category, and I'm going to select my root document type. I'm going to go ahead and select my invoice document. Now, whenever we take a look at those, we will be able to see some of the values that they have. So in our first node, which is our folder empty variable, one of the things that we're going to be doing, so we're going to go ahead and add a rule for our variable. We'll go to our folder, the system, and we're going to check that the number of documents, it's greater than 0. We can validate it'll make sure that it's not so the folder, the initial folder which we're scanning, have any documents. There's going to be two actions. One is going to be that we're going to end the process. We don't want this to move forward. We don't want it to get suspended. So end. The other one would actually go into our actual process. So if we have our if the number of documents is above 0, we're going to go ahead and have it go into our activity 3, which will be our true selection. If not, that's going to go, and like I said, it's going to go in and end the process. So for our activity 3, one of the things that we first have to do, at least with the type of documents and just general extraction classification, we're going to change this from a ordinary activity to a classification activity. We're going to go ahead and rename this to classification. The input folder, again, is going to be our folder variable that we just created, and we're going to utilize, I'm just going to utilize a single page classification separation profile for our classification. So no big deals. Again, one of the things that I do like to do within our nodes is having the name be something descriptive, because once you're into the double digits of nodes, having some generic name or activity name that's not descriptive of what it's actually doing can get a little bit confusing, and you have to go in, open up all of the nodes and make sure that you're selecting the right one. So again, and the next step, it's going to be let's do an extraction activity. Now that we have our documents that are classified, we're going to be able to extract those and get the fields that we want. And document the input for document or folder, we're still going to be utilizing our folder processing. Again, we're utilizing folder processing just because we want to group everything together, at least for the classification and extraction. After these few steps, we're going to be separating the documents and doing a couple loops just so that we can actually examine each and every one of the documents in case that we need to reject a single document. We want to go ahead and create another process for the rejected documents, and so that way we don't have documents that are either approved or rejected that are moving along with the same process. And we can actually streamline the process of the rejections being corrected, and the ones that don't have any errors that can move forward into the rest of the process. So in order to do so, I'm going to create a new activity, and this is going to be a loop. We're going to be checking each one of the documents, make sure that the extraction was corrected or was correct. Actually, before we get into the loop, I'm going to go ahead and set a manual activity. So we're going to be doing a validation activity so that the user can go in and validate. We're going to be assuming that the user is validating and rejecting the documents based on the values. Pretty straightforward. In some instances, we could check to make sure that the PO number is not blank. If it is blank, we mark the field, the invoice as a non-PO invoice. But for this purposes, we're just going to be allowing the users to do the validation and make sure that the documents are valid before moving forward. Again, we're going to be utilizing our folder, and that should be a very simple classification, extraction, and validation. We can do validation, or we can do a document review node that will allow the users to make sure that their documents are just that they scanned correctly, that they extracted correctly, but we're going to allow them to do a validation. That way, if the system didn't extract the workflow, the data correctly, they can correct it before it actually moves forward. So now from here, we are going to start our loop so that we can actually start working with single documents as opposed to the folder variable. And the reason why again, one of the reasons why we're doing a folder as opposed to a document since the beginning is because we don't want it to, we don't want to have a validation for each one of the documents. We have a validation for all of the documents within that batch, and the users can easily jump from one document to another and validate a little bit quicker than if we were creating a validation form for each one of the documents. So we're going to go ahead and recreate a loop. In order for us to be able to utilize this loop, we're going to have several variables filled out here, and I'm going to go ahead and create those right after I change and add a descriptive name to my loop type. So let's call this document loop. All right, so as far as the variables for our documents, we're going to need a couple of variables to be created. One of them is going to be the loop start index. This is where the loop's going to start, and we can actually do this as a short number with a value of 0. And then we would have a loop Boolean. We need a Boolean in order for us to be able to see if there's any documents left within that folder. So I'm just going to call this documents found, and I'm going to call that, it's going to be again it's going to be a Boolean with a default value of false. You can go back over to our designer. The complex variable that we're going to be utilizing, it's going to be the same folder that we had that we're working with. So we're going to be going into that folder. We look at the system variables that are attached within that folder, and we're going to be selecting the documents that are within that folder. So now the initial index that we're going to be utilizing for this loop is that loop start index variable that I just created. It's a numeric variable that starts at 0, and depending on the amount of documents that we have, that's going to be incremented each time that there is a document. So again, the current index is pretty much the starting value, and in the updated index, we're going to be utilizing that same variable just so that we can start incrementing because we will need that later on. And then now if we found a row for that loop, that means that there is a document found within that folder. We're going to be selecting the document found Boolean. So now we're going to be selecting only a single column for our loop. And when we set the column, the mapping for this is going to be an actual document variable that we created earlier today. So now we have a very simple process that's going to have a classification, extraction, validation, and document loop. So we want to make sure that the documents are valid within this process. I'm going to go ahead and create a decision node, and I'm going to call this documents valid. Let's call it our documents valid. So we're going to be actually, before we do that, we have to make sure that there's any rows. So we're going to be row found, and we're going to be selecting our row found variable, and we're going to select equals true. We validate it. So now we're going to have, now that there's still rows, and we're going to go ahead and now actually have another decision. Again, this is where we're actually going to be checking if the documents are valid. And since now we have the loop, we're working at a document level, we're going to be opening up our document variable, and we're going to go into the system variables available for that. And we're going to be utilizing the valid. If it's, then we're going to go ahead again, set it equal to true. We're going to go ahead and validate it. I'm going to leave the true path empty just for a second, so that we can actually create the processes that are going to be created. So now we're checking to see if the document is valid. If it is valid, there's nothing really much that we want to do with it. So we'll go ahead and just loop it back into our document loop just to make sure that that we can go into it, go back to the loop. So if the document is valid, we don't want to touch it right now. And we're just trying to get those documents that are invalid right at the moment. If the document is invalid, we're going to have another loop right here set up just so that we can actually move these documents to a separate folder. So we're going to create another folder, and the documents that are invalid are going to be moved into that folder, and we can create a process with that for that rejected document. But at this point, we're just going to move them into a specific folder. So we would have we'll have another decision node attached to this. I'm going to move this a little bit higher just so we can keep on. And we're going to check if the hold folder exists. Okay, so we're going to so now that we have that, we're going to go ahead and take we're going to need to create a couple of variables as well as in order to check with the hold folder to see if it actually exists or not. So we were going to create a variable that's going to be called hold folder count. There's going to be another numeric variable that's going to start at 0. And we're going to be utilizing this for our decision node right here. And we're going to be calling that, and we're going to be checking to see if the hold folder count is less or equal to 0. If the hold folder count is 0 or doesn't exist, if it doesn't exist, we're going to have a node that is going to be creating that new variable that we wanted. Okay, so we're going to be calling this create hold folder. And this is actually going to be, we're going to be utilizing the .NET activity that KTA has, and we're going to go ahead and configure it. We're going to be utilizing the TotalAgility SDK, and we're going to be utilizing the capture document service. And we're going to create a folder. For the session ID, we're going to go into our server variables. And we're going to go into, we're going to take our system session ID. So we don't need much more information than that. The only thing that we're going to be utilizing now is going to be the return parameter of the folder that folder is going to be created. For this, we're going to need another variable that's going to have the ID for that folder. So I'm going to go ahead and take create the new variable, which is actually going to be called hold folder ID. And that's going to be a string. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and add the variable, and that's going to just go in and create the as the case. So that's going to go ahead and start creating our folder for us. Um, we need to, after this, we need to update the folder ID. So even though it was just created, and if the folder didn't had been changed, we still need to update the folder right here. I'm going to go ahead and create. Oops, I apologize. Folder, and that would be an expression for us to be able uh, to update the folder. I'm going to come back to the configuration of this in a little bit. So now the next step that we would need to do for this um, is I'm going to create another node, which is actually the node that's going to be doing the moving portion of it. And I'm going to go ahead and put it down here because if the hold folder does exist, I'm going to go ahead and route it directly into the move folder, as opposed to actually having to create the hold folder. We're going to call this as folder, and this will be another .NET activity. We'll go into the configuration again of this in a second. Now, the last step for this process for us to be able to move those documents into the hold folder, we're going to need another expression activity to update the counts. And this will be another expression activity. So now that we've gone ahead and moved it out of our regular folder and into the hold folder, what we will do is we need to close out the loop for this section. So we'll go ahead and take this all the way back to our document loop. So again, just to give you a little bit of overview of what this part of the process is doing, is the loop is opening up the folder and checking each one of the documents that are within that folder, and seeing if the document first is going to check to see if that folder does have any documents, or if there's another row found within the document. If there's, let's say it's the first document that's being opened up, it's going to go ahead and then check to see if the document is valid. And if the document is valid, it's going to go ahead and go back over to the loop. No issue with that document. If the document is not valid, or if it was rejected, it'll go into our another decision node where we'll check to see if the document hold folder, or if the hold folder exists. If it doesn't, it's going to go ahead and create the hold folder, update the folder, then move it to a folder, and then update the counts. If the hold folder does exist, it's going to go ahead and skip these two nodes that we have right here and move directly into the move to hold folder activity and the update counts. So if the row is found, we're going to go ahead and move it over to the document's valid node. Now, if the document is valid, we would move it back over to the loop. If it's false, it'll go over to our hold folder exists. Because of the logic that we're doing, we can modify this so that we can have different statements. But for the hold folder, if it does exist, if this situation is true, so if the hold folder count is equal to 0 or less than 0, for that matter, that means it wouldn't exist. So we go over, and the true statement for this is going to be the create hold folder for us. Okay, so we have the create hold folder created. Now the update folder. Again, this is a little bit of a repetitive process, but we're actually going to select we're going to go ahead and create another variable. Now that's going to be a hold folder. This is going to be a folder variable, just so that we can hold the documents, and we're just going to leave the default value blank. So we select that, we go back over to our designer, and the update expression for our configuration with target variable is going to be our hold folder, and we're going to be selecting the hold folder ID. So what this will do is it will tell that the hold folder that we have here has this ID. We're going to go ahead and test that. Everything's valid. Wait, okay, so now we actually have a new folder defined within this section of the node, and we would move over to the .NET activity to actually configure that node. Again, we're going to be utilizing the standard activity TotalAgility SDK that we have, and we're going to continue utilizing the captured document service. Except for the method today, right now we're actually going to be utilizing the move document. Again, we're going to be selecting our server variables. We change our category, and we select our system session ID. The next thing that we're going to be doing, we're going to be collecting the document ID here, the document that we want to move. So we go back over to our process variables, and we select our document. Then the hold folder ID that we're going to be selecting is going to be the hold folder ID variable that we have, and the insert index, it's going to be that's going to get incremented is going to be our hold folder count, so that it knows into which step is going to be put into. So we have this, and now the counts that we need to update. We're going to update the hold folder count. It's an expression, and we're going to be updating that count. So we will go into our hold folder count. We select the hold folder count variable, and since we want to be for it to increase, we can just do +1. That way, it'll take the current value of our hold folder count and add 1 to it. Again, we test this and we validate the expression, and we can go ahead and add it. So now our system is actually creating a process where it's actually going into each one of the documents in the loop, checking to see if it's rejected. If it's rejected, it moves it into a different folder. So now that we have that, we can actually go back into our main process, and we can actually go ahead, and we're here. We would need to still select, since again, we're trying to work with folders just so that we can minimize the amount of processes that get created and the validation users to get to be more efficient with the validation. We're not creating a single process, rejected process for each one of these. We're going to be utilizing a single process for all of the rejected documents within that folder. So we will, now that we have here, one of the things that we want to do is we want to go ahead and create another decision node, and to see if the rejected documents exist, to see if the hold folder count actually if the hold folder actually has any documents. So we can call it hold empty. Okay, and we can again have the hold folder if it's greater than 0. We validate this. So now if the holder count that we got updated here is above 0, definitely we are going to go ahead and create a new process. We would create the we would create the rejection process. If not, if the hold folder doesn't have any variables, we can actually go ahead and start our process to either connect to an ERP system via the SDK, an API, or any direct integrations, or just do a direct export. For the purposes of this, I'm just going to go ahead and create an export activity. And I'm going to go ahead and select my export activity for these documents. So now that we have this, we would actually go ahead and select create new job. Job type, we're going to create new job. And we would, I'm going to utilize a pre-existing rejection process that I already have, just so that I actually we can demonstrate this. So now we're going to be selecting the hold folder. So we're going to create a new process within the hold folder, so that all of those documents that have been rejected can go into the rejection process, and we move forward. The documents that we still have in our folder are going to go ahead and get exported within the configuration of this one. So I'm going to go ahead and select the folder document, the folder variable, and export order by document order. So we will need a couple of variables. It's the export success indicator, documents not exported, and document exported. So I'm going to go ahead and create those. The success indicator, it would be document exported. Again, it's going to be a Boolean. We're going to, and that will hold the information as to whether document was exported or not. And then we would need a complex variable for the documents that did get exported. Let me just add so, and another complex variable for documents not exported. And create it as so. We go back here. We select document exported. Documents not exported, we go again with our complex variable, and the documents exported, we go to our complex variable. Before the export actually happens, you can introduce a PDF activity if you want to create your PDF out of those invoices. Again, Kofax works best if whenever you're extracting and classifying your documents, you have a TIFF image. And so that would mean if you are receiving it through like a PDF, through an email inbox, it's always best to transform it into a PDF and then create the PDF after the fact if you need to export it as a PDF. So from here, the only thing that we're missing is we're going to need a endnote for our process. So again, our export, once our documents are exported, we can go ahead and export it as well. So if the hold folder is not empty, if the value is greater than 0, the true is going to be create the rejection process, and then it'll end it. Actually, we would create the rejection process, but if we do have any holds, we don't want it to create the rejection process and then end it, because those documents that were still in our folder, the unrejected documents are not going to get exported this way. So I'm going to go ahead and remove the connection to the end node, and I would still do a connection through export. So that it will create the rejection process. We move those documents that are in the hold folder to a new process, but we still want those documents to the valid documents to export. So we go in from the rejection process over to your export, and then to the end node. So I'm going to go ahead and move everything here to the front. And again, this is just a very, very simple process that will allow you to extract validate your documents, make sure that all were correct. The purpose of the section up here that we have up here of the hold folder count would just be if you need to streamline the process of separating those documents that were rejected or that needed any type of correction from the documents that were extracted and validated correctly. We wouldn't want to bog down the documents that got extracted successfully until the invalid documents get corrected, because that can delay the payment process if for invoices or the purchasing process, depending on the purpose. So definitely we want to go ahead and move those documents to another folder. That way we can create a rejection process that can be handled in a timely manner, but the documents that are valid are going to go ahead and move forward to the process, going to a different ERP or going to a little bit to just an export location immediately after validation. Again, this process of actually creating the hold folder and creating the rejection process, everything's automated process. That's going to be a matter of seconds. So it wouldn't delay the process of those documents being rejected. So again, I'm going to go ahead and save my process. See if there's any errors. We didn't map any classification groups, so let's go ahead and do that. And we didn't change the new process name. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and the classification group. So we would need to go into the process. So we're going to call this, let's call this office hours invoice process. Processing. We're going to move it into our office hours category. And we're going to be selecting our classification group that we created earlier in our office hours category. Okay, so we have everything here. Go ahead and save it. The process actually now saved successfully, so we can go ahead and release it. So, all right, guys. So now we have a very basic process that's going to do classification, extraction, and validation. Then it will move all of the invalid documents to a separate hold folder and create a rejection process for those rejected documents and export the valid documents without any delay. The purpose why we're moving the rejected documents to a different folder in a different process is because we don't want to hold the valid documents until the invalid documents get corrected or addressed. Therefore, we create a separate process so they can get handled in their own timely manner, but the valid documents can move forward and your process can continue on its way, whether it's paying the vendors or paying your suppliers. We're ending today with an export, but you can definitely add more nodes here to connect to your ERP system, utilize an API, or continue adding more logic depending on the needs of your business. But for today, we're just going to be exporting to to our file system that we will have right here. Depending on when you're watching this, we will have a separate office hours dealing with the extraction through Transformation Designer. So stay tuned. That might already be on our website or coming up. Thank you.